The smell hit him first: burnt wood, copper, and death. Caleb Drayton's boots stopped at the edge of what used to be home. 3 graves. Fresh dirt. His father's hat on the fence post riddled with bullet holes. The land deed nailed to the porch. Foreclosed, stamped in red ink like a brand. No lawmen, no witnesses. Just silence bought with fear and gold. The town of Covenant Ridge had let this happen. Let good people die so rich men could profit. Caleb's jaw tightened as he knelt by the smallest grave, his baby sister, buried in her Sunday dress. Someone would answer for this. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's ride this trail together to the end. The wagon creaked under the weight of 3 pine coffins as it rolled into Covenant Ridge just after dawn. Caleb Drayton walked beside it, leading the mule by a frayed rope, his face carved from stone and shadow. Dust clung to his black coat like a second skin. He hadn't slept in 4 days, not since the telegraph reached him 200 miles north with 6 words that changed everything. Come home, your family is dead. The main street stretched before him, empty except for a few merchants sweeping their storefronts and pretending not to notice. Word traveled fast in a town this size. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone knew what he'd find when he rode up to the Drayton ranch outside town, and everyone had chosen to look the other way. Caleb stopped the wagon outside Meeker's general store. An old man in a leather apron paused mid-sweep, his weathered face tightening with something that might have been guilt or fear or both. "Mr. Meeker," Caleb said quietly. His voice was rough from disuse, low as distant thunder. Meeker glanced at the coffins, then quickly back to the ground. "Caleb, I'm real sorry about your pa and the young ones." "Sorry enough to tell me what happened?" The broom stilled in the old man's hands. "Caleb, you were friends with my father for 20 years. Caleb's gray eyes fixed on him like rifle sights. "You drank whiskey on our porch every Sunday. Lucy used to braid flowers for your wife's grave." Meeker's knuckles went white around the broom handle. "It ain't that simple." "Then make it simple." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer and the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. Finally Meeker spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "There was a dispute about land. Your pa, he wouldn't sign over the water rights to his northern pasture. Said it belonged to your family, bought and paid for legal. But there were men who wanted it, powerful men." He swallowed hard. 3 nights ago, riders came. Witnesses say it was quick. Your pa got off 2 shots before they finished it. Witnesses, the word dripped venom. But no names. "Caleb, I got a business. I got workers who depend on—" "My sister was 9 years old." Caleb's voice didn't rise, didn't break. That made it worse. "My brother was 12. They shot them in their beds." Meeker's face crumpled. "I know. God help me. I know." "God's not here," Caleb said flatly. "Just men. And men can be found." He clicked his tongue, and the mule started forward again, the wagon wheels groaning. Meeker called after him, voice cracking. "The undertaker's already been paid. The plots are dug. You don't have to—" "I bury my own." The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the valley, surrounded by a wrought iron fence that had seen better days. The graves were there, just as Meeker said, 3 dark rectangles carved into the red earth, waiting. Caleb worked alone, lowering each coffin with ropes tied to the wagon hitch, his movements mechanical and precise. He didn't pray, didn't cry, just shoveled dirt until his hands bled through his gloves and the sun climbed high enough to burn. When the last stone was set, he stood there in the heat, staring at the names carved by a stranger's hand. Thomas Drayton, beloved father. Lucy Drayton, age 9, Samuel Drayton, age 12. "I'm going to find them," he said to the wind and the silence. "Every last one. And when I do, they'll know what it means to take from a Drayton." He turned away from the graves and didn't look back. The ranch was worse than he'd imagined. The main house was a blackened skeleton, support beams jutting toward the sky like charred ribs. The barn had been torched as well, the horses either stolen or scattered. Only the old bunkhouse remained intact, and even that had been ransacked, Drawers pulled out, mattresses slashed, every corner searched. They'd been looking for something. Caleb moved through the wreckage methodically, cataloging what remained. His father's rifle was gone. The family Bible, his mother's jewelry, the cash box they kept under the floorboards, all taken. But in the ruins of the barn, under a collapsed section of roof that would have taken 3 men to move, he found what they'd missed: a leather satchel, fire-scorched but intact. Inside were papers. Land deeds, water rights, survey maps marked in his father's careful hand, and beneath those a single envelope addressed to Thomas Drayton in flowing script. Caleb opened it carefully, unfolding the letter inside. "Mr. Drayton, this is your final opportunity to reconsider our generous offer. The northern water rights are essential to the development of this territory, and your continued refusal to negotiate is obstructing progress that will benefit the entire region. I urge you to think of your family's safety and future prosperity. I await your response. Respectfully, Silas Vance." Caleb read the letter 3 times, memorizing every word. Silas Vance. He knew the name. Everyone in 3 counties did. Vance owned half the land between here and the territorial capital, ran the bank, the freight company, and had judges and marshals in his pocket like pocket change. If Vance wanted something, he got it. And if someone stood in his way, Caleb folded the letter and slipped it into his coat pocket. Then he went to the bunkhouse and pulled up the loose board in the corner, the one his father thought nobody knew about. Inside the hidden compartment was a small canvas bag. He opened it and counted out $400 in gold coin. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to buy information, enough to buy time, enough to buy justice, if justice could be bought at all in Covenant Ridge. The Rusty Nail Saloon sat at the end of Main Street, a 2-story clapboard building with windows so grimy they barely let in light. Caleb pushed through the doors just after nightfall, when the place was thick with tobacco smoke and the sharp scent of spilled whiskey. Conversations died as he entered, faces turning toward him with varying degrees of recognition and wariness. He walked to the bar and set a silver dollar on the scarred wood. Whiskey. The bottle. The bartender, a thick-necked man with a scar splitting his left eyebrow, hesitated, then grabbed a bottle from the shelf and slid it across. Caleb poured himself 2 fingers and drank it down without tasting it, then refilled the glass and turned to face the room. About 20 men scattered across the tables. Ranch hands, drifters, a few townsmen trying to look tougher than they were. And in the far corner, playing cards beneath a lamp that swung on a chain, sat a group of 4 men Caleb didn't recognize. They were dressed too well for ranch work, their guns worn too comfortably. Hired men. The kind who rode in, did a job, and rode out before questions got asked. One of them, a lean man with a mustache waxed to sharp points, caught Caleb looking and smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. Caleb poured another drink and didn't look away. The card game continued for another half hour. Caleb nursed his whiskey and watched, noting the way the men moved, the way they checked the door every few minutes, the way the one with the mustache kept his hand near his pistol even when dealing cards. Professional paranoia. The mark of men who'd made enemies. Finally, the game broke up. 3 of the men headed upstairs to rented rooms. The 4th, Mustache, walked to the bar, standing 2 feet from Caleb, and ordered tequila. "You got a staring problem, friend?" he said without looking over. "Just admiring the company," Caleb replied evenly. "Don't see many professional gamblers in Covenant Ridge." The man's smile widened. "Who says I'm a gambler? Your hands say you handle cards more than cattle. Your boots say you spend more time in saloons than stirrups. And your gun says you're not here for honest work." Now the man turned, his dark eyes glittering with amusement. "You're Drayton's boy, the one who rides for the big ranches up north. Heard you were good with a rope and better with a rifle." "You heard about my family too?" Everybody heard. The amusement faded slightly. "Bad business, that." "Bad business," Caleb repeated softly, rolling the words like dice. "That what you call murdering children in their sleep? Bad business?" The saloon had gone silent again. The bartender edged away from them, his hand dropping below the bar, where men kept axe handles for when things got ugly. The man with the mustache sipped his tequila, considering. Then he set the glass down with a soft click. "I don't know anything about that. I ride where the money takes me, but I don't shoot kids. That's not my line. But you know who does. Maybe. He studied Caleb's face. Question is, what's knowing worth to you? Depends what you know. Names, faces. Who paid them? Who sent them? Where they drink when they want to celebrate a job well done. The man's voice dropped lower. And maybe, if you're real nice, where they're planning to be tomorrow night when they collect the rest of their money. Caleb's heartbeat kicked up, but his face remained carved granite. What's your price? $500. Gold. That's steep. Information that good always is. The man leaned against the bar, casual as Sunday morning. But I'll tell you what. I like you. You got that look about you, the kind that says you're going to do something stupid and violent no matter what anybody tells you. So I'll make it 300, just because I'm curious to see how it plays out. Caleb reached into his coat and counted out $300 in coin, stacking it carefully on the bar. The man watched, eyes sharp, then swept the money into his pocket with practiced efficiency. There's a crew staying at the old Kellerman place, about 5 miles east of here. Abandoned ranch. Good cover. 5 men, maybe 6. They did the job on your family, along with a few others they brought in for the rough work. He paused, taking another sip. Leader's name is Wade Cutler, big bastard, scar across his throat from a knife fight in Abilene. Killed at least a dozen men for money. He's the one who shot your pa. The name burned itself into Caleb's memory like a brand. Who hired them? That, my friend, is a more complicated question. The man's expression shifted, something like respect crossing his features. Word is it came down from high up, real high. The kind of man who doesn't get his own hands dirty, who uses lawyers and bankers and hired killers to do his shopping. If you go after Cutler and his boys, you might get your revenge, but you won't get justice, not the kind that sticks. Silas Vance. The man's eyebrows rose. You're smarter than you look. Will Cutler talk? If I make him? Cutler's loyal to money, not people. Put enough pressure on him, hurt him bad enough. He shrugged. Yeah, he'll talk. Won't do you much good without proof, though. Vance has judges wrapped tighter than a Christmas present. Your word against his? You'll hang before sunrise. Caleb nodded slowly, his mind already working through the angles, the possibilities. You got a name? Rico Salazar. He extended a hand. Caleb shook it, firm grip, calloused palms. I do some work for people around here. Tracking, scouting, information brokering. If you need anything else, you can find me here most nights. Why help me? Rico's smile returned, sharp and knowing. Because Silas Vance is a cancer on this territory, and watching someone cut into him sounds a whole lot more interesting than cards. Plus, he tipped his hat. Your pa helped my cousin once, years back. Gave him work when nobody else would, asked no questions when the law came sniffing around. Figure I owe the Drayton name at least one good turn. Caleb absorbed this, then nodded. The Kellerman place. 5 miles east. They'll be expecting trouble eventually, but not this soon. You got maybe 24 hours before they scatter. Rico pushed away from the bar. One more thing, Drayton. Cutler's good, real good, and he don't fight fair. You ride out there alone, you better be ready to kill fast or die slow. I'll keep that in mind. Rico touched his hat brim and walked out into the night, leaving Caleb alone at the bar with half a bottle of whiskey and a decision to make. The bartender reappeared, wiping down the wood with a rag that had seen better days. You really gonna go after them? Caleb poured the last of his whiskey and drank it down, feeling the burn settle into his chest like molten iron. You know any reason I shouldn't? Yeah, you'll get yourself killed. Maybe. And even if you don't, even if you somehow put down Cutler and every man riding with him, Vance will just hire more. He's got money that don't end and patience that don't run out. You can't fight that kind of power alone. Caleb set the empty glass down and met the bartender's eyes. My father tried the legal way. Tried to negotiate, to be reasonable, to play by rules that men like Vance don't even acknowledge. And for his trouble, he got bullets. My brother and sister got bullets. The law looked the other way because Vance owns the law. He pushed the bottle across the bar. I'm done with legal. I'm done with reasonable. I'm going to make them pay in the only language they understand. The bartender said nothing, just took the bottle and turned away. Caleb walked out of the Rusty Nail into the cool night air, his mind clear and cold as winter water. 24 hours before the killers scattered. 24 hours to prepare, to plan, to become the kind of man who could walk into a nest of professional murderers and walk out alive. He headed back to the ruined ranch, to the bunkhouse where his father had kept more than gold hidden beneath the floorboards. But the second compartment was harder to find. You had to know which board to press first to release the catch. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were things Thomas Drayton had brought back from the war and never spoken about. A Colt revolver, custom worked with a hair trigger and ivory grips. A Bowie knife with a 12-inch blade. And something else. Something Caleb had only seen once as a child when his father was checking to make sure it still worked. A Gatling gun. Caleb lifted it from its hiding place, feeling the weight of it, 40 pounds of rotating barrels and mechanical death. His father had carried it off a battlefield in Virginia, part of a gun crew that had been overrun and slaughtered. He'd buried it on the ranch, swearing he'd never use it again. But Thomas Drayton was dead, and Caleb had made a different kind of vow. He spent the next hours cleaning and oiling every part, checking the rotation mechanism, loading the ammunition hopper. The gun could fire 200 rounds per minute if you cranked it steady. More than enough to turn a small ranch house into a slaughterhouse. When he was finished, he sat on the bunkhouse steps and watched the stars wheel overhead, thinking about his sister's laugh, and his brother's plans to run the ranch someday, and his father's steady hands teaching him to shoot straight and true. Thinking about the way Lucy used to sing while doing chores, how Samuel always tried to act tougher than he was, how his father never broke a promise in his life. They were gone, erased like chalk marks in rain, but they wouldn't be forgotten. As the first light of dawn began to gray the eastern sky, Caleb loaded the Gatling gun into a reinforced wagon bed, along with ammunition, rope, and everything else he'd need. He hitched up the mule, checked his pistol one last time, and started east toward the Kellerman place, toward Wade Cutler and the men who'd murdered his family, toward the beginning of a reckoning that would shake Covenant Ridge to its foundations. The sun rose red as blood behind him, painting the whole world the color of vengeance. And Caleb Drayton rode into it without hesitation, without mercy, without anything left to lose. The Kellerman Ranch had been abandoned for 3 years, ever since the family packed up and moved to California chasing gold rumors that never panned out. The house sagged on its foundation. The barn was missing half its roof, and the corrals were choked with tumbleweeds. But smoke rose from the chimney, and horses stood tied in the yard, 4 of them, good stock, well-fed, and expensive. Caleb stopped the wagon a quarter-mile out, hidden by a rise in the land and a stand of cottonwoods. He pulled out the field glasses his father had carried in the war and studied the layout. 2 men visible outside, one smoking a cigarette by the well, another sitting on the porch cleaning a rifle. Both armed, both alert but not alarmed. Probably figured they were safe this far from town, with no witnesses and no law that would dare come for them. They figured wrong. Caleb waited, watching the patterns. The smoker by the well made rounds every 20 minutes, walking the perimeter. The man on the porch never moved except to work on his rifle. That meant at least 3 more inside, maybe more. Bad odds for a straight fight. Good thing he wasn't planning a straight fight. He waited until the smoker completed another round and went inside, then moved the wagon closer, using the barn as cover. The Gatling gun was heavy, but Caleb had rigged a wheeled mount that let him move it without making too much noise. He positioned it behind a low stone wall that bordered the property. Good cover, clear line of fire to both the house and the barn. Then he loaded his pistol, checked the Gatling gun one last time, and fired a single shot into the air. The reaction was instant. Men boiled out of the house, 5 of them, guns drawn, scanning for threats. The biggest one, a bull of a man with a scar splitting his throat, had to be Wade Cutler. He barked orders and the men spread out, taking cover behind the well, the porch, a water trough. "Who's out there?" Cutler's voice was gravel and rust. "Show yourself or we start shooting blind." Caleb stayed behind the stone wall, his hand on the Gatling gun's crank. "You killed Thomas Drayton 3 nights ago. Him and his children. I want to know who paid you." A pause. Then Cutler laughed. A wet, ugly sound. "That you, boy? Thomas's kid? Heard you were up north working ranches. Long way to come for a losing fight. Answer the question. Or what? You gonna shoot us? There's 5 of us and 1 of you." Cutler's confidence was thick as smoke. "Tell you what, you ride away right now, we'll call it even. Your pa made a bad business decision. Ain't personal. You shot a 9-year-old girl in her bed, Caleb said flatly. That's personal. Yeah, well, here's what's going to be personal. Caleb started cranking. The Gatling gun roared to life with a sound like the world tearing apart. Bullets chewed through the water trough, the porch railing, the side of the house. Splinters exploded. Men dove and scrambled and screamed. Caleb traversed the gun left to right, methodical as a man mowing hay, cutting down everything in a 40-degree arc. The smoker from earlier tried to run for the barn and made it 3 steps before a burst caught him across the chest and slammed him into the dirt. Another man, pinned behind the well, leaned out to return fire and lost his arm at the elbow. He fell back screaming, blood fountaining. Cutler was shouting orders, but his voice was drowned out by the mechanical thunder. The remaining men scattered, 2 diving through the house's front door, 1 making it around the side toward the barn. Caleb let off the crank, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the ringing in his ears. He reloaded quickly, hands steady. Then he called out, "Cutler, you talk now or I crank again and tear that house down to splinters with you in it." A long moment passed. Then Cutler's voice, tight with pain. "You crazy son of a bitch! Where the hell did you get a Gatling gun?" "My father's keepsake from the war. Now answer my question. Who hired you?" Another pause. Caleb heard urgent whispers from inside the house. Arguments, desperation. Finally, Cutler spoke again. "It was Vance. Silas Vance hired us through a middleman. Said your pa was holding up progress. Needed to be convinced to sell. We went to talk. Things got heated. Your pa went for his gun." "Liar," Caleb said softly. "My father was shot in his sleep, and my brother and sister never even woke up." Silence from the house. "You got proof?" Caleb continued. "Papers, letters, anything that connects Vance to this?" "We ain't stupid enough to keep evidence. Vance pays cash, uses cutouts, never puts his name on nothing." Cutler's voice was getting desperate now. "Look, you want Vance? Fine, I'll testify. I'll tell the law everything. Just don't—" Caleb started cranking again. The bullets ripped through walls like paper, shattering windows, punching through the thin roof. Inside, men screamed and furniture shattered, and the whole structure groaned under the assault. Caleb traversed slowly, ensuring coverage of every corner, every hiding spot. When the ammunition hopper ran dry, he stopped and waited. The house settled with a sound like a dying breath. Smoke drifted from bullet holes. Somewhere inside, someone was crying. "Last chance, Cutler," Caleb called. "Come out and we talk. Stay in there and I'll burn it with you inside." Movement at the door. Cutler stumbled out, one arm hanging useless, blood soaking his shirt. Behind him came one other man, younger, pale as milk, unhurt but terrified. The rest were either dead or too wounded to move. Cutler collapsed in the dirt 10 feet from the porch, breathing hard. "You got no idea what you've done. Vance owns this whole territory. He'll hunt you to the end of the earth." Caleb walked out from behind the stone wall, his pistol in hand. "Let him try." He stopped in front of Cutler, looking down at the man who'd killed his father. Up close, the scar across his throat looked like someone had tried to cut his head off and given up halfway. "You're going to write a confession, every detail, who hired you, what you did, how much you were paid, and you're going to sign it. And then what? You let me go?" Cutler's laugh turned into a cough that sprayed blood. "You ain't got mercy in you, boy. I can see it in your eyes." "You're right," Caleb said, "but I'm going to give you something my family didn't get. A choice." He gestured to the young man standing behind Cutler. "Your friend there can ride to town, get a doctor, maybe save your life. Or I can shoot you right now and save everyone the trouble. Your call." Cutler stared up at him, reading the truth in his face. Then he nodded slowly. "Get me paper." Ball. 20 minutes later, Caleb had a signed confession, blood-spotted but legible, detailing everything Cutler knew about the attack on the Drayton ranch. It wasn't enough to hang Vance in a court of law. Cutler was right about that. But it was a start. A loose thread. And if Caleb pulled hard enough, eventually the whole rotten tapestry would unravel. He left Cutler and his surviving man in the dirt, taking their horses and weapons. The Gatling gun went back in the wagon, covered with canvas. As he drove away from the Kellerman place, he could hear Cutler shouting curses that faded into the distance. Let him shout. Let him warn Vance. It didn't matter anymore. The game had changed. This wasn't about revenge alone now. It was about exposure, about dragging the truth into daylight where everyone could see it. By the time Caleb reached the outskirts of Covenant Ridge, the sun was high and hot. He drove straight through town to the marshal's office and kicked the door open without knocking. Marshal Ben Kincaid looked up from his desk, his weathered face going from annoyed to alarmed in half a second. "Drayton? What in the hell?" Caleb threw Cutler's confession on the desk. "Wade Cutler and his crew murdered my family on Silas Vance's orders. That's his confession, signed and witnessed. I'm filing a formal complaint." Kincaid picked up the paper with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the words. His face went pale, then flushed red. "Caleb, you can't just... Where did you get this?" "Kellerman Place. Cutler's there now, bleeding but alive. You want to arrest him? He's all yours." "This is..." Kincaid set the paper down like it might bite him. "This is a serious accusation against a powerful man. You understand what you're asking?" "I'm not asking," Caleb said quietly. "I'm telling, you're the law. There's evidence of murder. Do your job or admit you're just another man on Vance's payroll." The marshal's jaw worked, anger and fear warring across his features. Finally, he stood up, his chair scraping loud in the small office. "You got no idea what you've started." "Yeah, I do." Caleb turned toward the door. "I started the end of Silas Vance." He walked out into the bright afternoon, leaving the marshal staring at a confession that could either make him a hero or get him killed. Either way, the wheels were turning now, and Caleb Drayton had nothing left to do but keep pushing until everything broke. The confession sat on Marshal Kincaid's desk for exactly 47 minutes before a clerk from the telegraph office arrived with a sealed envelope. Caleb watched from across the street, leaning against the post outside Meeker's store, as the clerk hurried in and hurried out. 2 minutes later, Kincaid emerged, his face set like concrete, and walked straight toward the Covenant Ridge Bank, Silas Vance's bank. Rico Salazar appeared beside Caleb like smoke, his eyes tracking the marshal's path. "Faster than I expected. Vance must have eyes everywhere." "Let him know," Caleb said. "I want him to know. You're playing a dangerous game. Vance doesn't just crush his enemies, he erases them, makes it so they never existed at all. He already tried that with my family." Caleb's voice was flat, empty of everything except cold certainty. "Didn't take." Rico studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're going to need more than a signed confession and righteous anger. Vance has lawyers who could convince a jury that water flows uphill. You need leverage, real leverage." "What kind?" "The kind that makes powerful men sweat." Rico pulled a thin cigar from his vest and lit it, the smoke curling blue in the afternoon air. "Vance keeps records, every transaction, every dirty deal, every bribe and payoff, all documented and locked in a safe in his private office on the second floor of the bank. Man's paranoid as a cornered rat. Doesn't trust anyone, so he keeps proof of everything in case someone turns on him." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "You've seen this?" "I've heard about it from 3 different sources who worked for him at various times. One was his accountant before he had an unfortunate accident with a horse. Another was a lawyer who got drunk and chatty before he disappeared to San Francisco." Rico blew smoke toward the sky. "Third was a woman Vance kept for a while. When he got tired of her, she got talkative." "Where's she now?" "Running a boarding house in Pueblo. Smart woman. Got out while she still could." Rico turned to face Caleb directly. "Point is, those records exist. Get your hands on them, and you've got Vance by the throat. Everything he's done, everyone he's bought, all the blood on his hands, it'll be right there in black and white. That safe's going to be guarded. Oh, it's more than guarded. The bank's got 2 armed men during the day, 4 at night. Vance's office is locked with a key only he carries. The safe itself is a Mosler, best money can buy, needs both a combination and a key to open. And even if you got through all that, Vance lives in a mansion half a mile outside town with 6 men on his personal security detail." Rico's smile was sharp as a knife edge. "Like I said, dangerous game." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through possibilities, angles, weaknesses. Finally, he spoke. "I need to talk to Vance, face to face." "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking?" Rico exhaled slowly, studying Caleb's expression. "No. No, you don't. But walking into Vance's office is suicide. Man doesn't negotiate with people who threaten him. He buries them. Then I better make sure he can't. Caleb pushed off from the post. You know where I can find him tonight? There's a town council meeting at 7. Public building, witnesses everywhere. Vance chairs the council, makes sure everyone sees him as a respectable pillar of the community. Rico's expression shifted to something like concern. What are you planning? To give him a choice, Caleb started walking toward the livery stable where he'd left the wagon. Same choice I gave Cutler. And how'd that work out for Cutler? Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. The town hall was a whitewashed building with tall windows and a bell tower that hadn't been used since the church burned down 5 years ago. By the time Caleb arrived just before 7, a crowd had already gathered. Shopkeepers, ranchers, townspeople curious about the newcomer who'd supposedly shot up the Kellerman place and dragged a confession out of Wade Cutler. Word traveled fast, especially when it involved blood and accusations against the most powerful man in the territory. Caleb took a seat in the back row, his hat pulled low, his coat buttoned to hide the pistol at his hip. The hall filled quickly, standing room only by the time the council members filed in and took their seats at the long table up front. 5 men total, all dressed in their Sunday best, all wearing expressions of practiced civic duty. And at the center, in the largest chair, sat Silas Vance. He was smaller than Caleb expected, compact and trim, maybe 50 years old, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they touched. His suit was Eastern-made, probably cost more than most men in the room earned in a year. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. Vance called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. Gentlemen, ladies, thank you for attending. We have several items on tonight's agenda, beginning with the proposed expansion of I'd like to address the council. Caleb stood up, his voice cutting through the formalities like a blade. Every head turned. Vance's eyes found him immediately, cold and assessing. The floor is not open for public comment until item 7 on the agenda. If you'll take your seat. This won't wait for item 7. Caleb walked down the center aisle, his boots loud on the wooden floor. 3 days ago, my father, Thomas Drayton, was murdered along with my brother and sister. The killers were hired men led by Wade Cutler, and according to Cutler's signed confession, they were working on your orders. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, chairs scraping as people stood to get a better look. Vance's expression didn't change, not a flicker of surprise or concern. He simply waited until the noise died down, then spoke with the measured calm of a judge pronouncing sentence. That is a serious accusation, Mr. Drayton. I assume you have evidence to support such a claim? I have Cutler's confession. Signed, witnessed, and filed with Marshal Kincaid this morning. A confession obtained under what circumstances? Vance leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. I heard you assaulted Mr. Cutler and several of his associates at the old Kellerman property. Used some kind of military weapon to wound 3 men and kill 2 others. That true? Caleb met his gaze without blinking. They murdered my family. I made them answer for it. By torturing a confession out of them? Vance shook his head slowly, like a disappointed schoolteacher. Mr. Drayton, I understand your grief. Truly I do. The loss of family is a terrible thing, but the law exists for a reason. Vigilante justice, coerced confessions, violence. These things cannot be tolerated in a civilized society. Civilized? Caleb tasted the word like poison. You sent killers to murder a 9-year-old girl in her bed and you want to talk about civilized? I sent no one. Vance's voice remained perfectly level. I had a business dispute with your father regarding water rights to his northern pasture. I made him a fair offer, which he refused, that's all. If Wade Cutler and his men decided to take matters into their own hands, that's on them, not me. I'm a businessman, not a murderer. You're a liar. The room went dead silent. One of the other council members, a nervous-looking man with spectacles, half rose from his seat. Mr. Drayton, you need to watch your language. Or what? Caleb's attention never left Vance. You'll have me arrested? Thrown out? Maybe hire some men to make me disappear like everyone else who stands in your way? Vance stood slowly, buttoning his jacket with precise movements. Marshal Kincaid, I believe Mr. Drayton has had sufficient time to air his grievances. Please escort him from the building. Kincaid had been standing against the side wall, looking like he wished the floor would open and swallow him whole. Now he stepped forward reluctantly, his hand near his gun but not touching it. "Caleb, you need to leave. Now. Not until I'm finished." "You are finished," Vance said coldly. "You've made wild accusations based on a coerced confession from a known criminal. You've admitted to assault and murder, and now you're disrupting a lawful town council meeting. Marshal, do your duty." Kincaid's hand moved to his gun, but Caleb spoke first, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Before I go, I want everyone here to know something. Silas Vance didn't just kill my family. He's been bleeding this territory dry for years, buying up land through fraud and intimidation, fixing prices, bribing officials. The bank, the freight company, the water rights, it's all built on blood and lies. And I'm going to prove it." "With what?" Vance's composure finally cracked, just a hairline fracture. "Campfire stories and conspiracy theories? You have nothing. I have Cutler's confession, and I'm going to find the rest." Caleb started backing toward the door, his hand on his pistol now. "You made a mistake when you killed my family, Vance. You should have made sure I was there too. Because now I'm the one thing you can't buy and can't scare, and I'm going to tear down everything you've built." "Marshal!" Vance's voice cracked like a whip. "Arrest that man!" But Caleb was already out the door, moving fast into the darkness. Behind him, he heard shouting, the scrape of chairs, boots pounding on floorboards. He ran for the alley behind the hall where he'd tied his horse, swung into the saddle, and kicked the animal into a gallop just as Kincaid and two deputies burst out the back door. "Stop! Stop right there!" Shots rang out, bullets whining past in the dark. Caleb leaned low over the horse's neck and rode hard for the edge of town, the animal's hooves throwing sparks from the stones. More shots, closer this time. Something tugged at his coat sleeve, hot and sharp. Then he was past the buildings, into the open country, with nothing but starlight and fury driving him forward. He didn't slow down until he was 2 miles out, certain he wasn't being followed. Only then did he check his arm and find a neat bullet graze across his bicep, bleeding but shallow. He tore a strip from his shirt and bound it tight, then kept riding. Not back to the ranch. That would be the first place they'd look. Instead, he headed north toward a line of low hills where his father used to take him hunting. There was an old shepherd's cabin up there, abandoned for years, with a spring nearby and enough cover to hide a man who needed to disappear for a while. He needed to think, to plan, to figure out his next move in a game that had just gotten infinitely more dangerous. The cabin was exactly where he remembered, a sagging structure of weathered logs and a roof that let in rain, but solid enough to provide shelter. Caleb unsaddled his horse, tended to his wound properly with supplies from his saddlebag, then built a small fire in the stone hearth and sat staring into the flames. Vance would be moving now, faster and harder than before. The public accusation had forced his hand. He'd call in favors, put pressure on the marshal, maybe even offer a reward for Caleb's capture. Dead or alive, it wouldn't matter. And with Cutler's confession in official hands, Vance would be working to discredit it, to bury it under legal motions and technicalities until it meant nothing. Caleb needed those records Rico had mentioned, needed proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. But getting into Vance's office seemed impossible. Too many guards, too many locks, too much risk. Unless... A sound outside brought him to his feet, gun drawn. Footsteps on the path, deliberate and unhurried. A knock on the door, 3 sharp raps. "It's Rico, don't shoot!" Caleb opened the door and found the information broker standing there with a canvas bag slung over his shoulder and an amused expression on his face. "You made quite an impression at the town hall. Half of Covenant Ridge thinks you're a hero, the other half thinks you're insane. How'd you find me?" "I'm good at finding people. It's my job." Rico stepped inside without being invited, setting his bag on the rough table. "Also, your father used to talk about this place when he was drinking. Mentioned bringing you up here to teach you to track deer." Caleb lowered the gun but didn't holster it. "What do you want?" "To help." Rico started unpacking the bag. Dried meat, bread, a bottle of whiskey, ammunition for Caleb's pistol. "You're going after those records, aren't you? The ones in Vance's safe." "Maybe." "Definitely." Rico poured 2 tin cups of whiskey and pushed one across the table. And you're going to get yourself killed trying because you don't know the first thing about safe cracking or breaking into secured buildings. He raised his cup in a mock toast. Lucky for you, I do. Caleb studied him, weighing trust against necessity. Why? I told you before, your pa helped my cousin. That's one reason. Rico took a long drink. Second reason is I'm tired of watching Vance choke this territory to death. I've lived here 15 years, watched good people lose everything because one man decided he wanted more. Your father tried to stand up to him legally, properly. Look where that got him. He set the cup down hard. Maybe it's time someone stood up to him the other way. You know what happens if we fail? Yeah, we die badly, and Vance wins again. Rico's smile was grim. But if we succeed, we burn his whole empire to ash. Seems like decent odds to me. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, then picked up the whiskey and drank. The liquor burned all the way down, settling into his chest like liquid resolve. Tell me about the bank. Rico's grin widened. Now you're talking smart. They spent the next 3 hours going over every detail. Rico had been watching Vance's operation for years, gathering information the way some men collected stamps, obsessively and with great attention to detail. He sketched the bank's layout on a scrap of paper, marking guard positions, patrol routes, the location of Vance's office. 4 guards at night, like I said, Rico explained, tapping the paper with a charcoal stick. 2 outside, 2 inside. They rotate every 3 hours. Midnight, 3 in the morning, 6. The weak point is right at rotation time when they're tired and distracted. That's still 4 armed men, which is why we don't go through them. We go around. Rico added a line to the sketch. There's a service entrance in the back that connects to the alley behind the tailor's shop. Used for deliveries, taking out trash. Locked, but not guarded. Get through that door quietly, and we're inside without anyone seeing. And then? Then we have maybe 15 minutes before the interior guards complete their circuit. Vance's office is upstairs, second door on the right. The lock's good, but not impossible. I can get us through in 2 minutes if I'm not rushed. Caleb pointed to the sketch. The safe? That's the hard part. Rico set down the charcoal and met Caleb's eyes. Mosler's safe, like I said. Combination lock plus a key lock. I can crack the combination. Takes about 20 minutes if everything goes perfect. But the key, he shrugged. Vance keeps it on him at all times. On his watch chain, never lets it out of his sight. So we need to get it from him. Without him knowing we took it, yeah. Otherwise he changes the combination and we're back to nothing. Caleb stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. Vance has a routine. Every morning he goes to the bank at 8 sharp, works in his office until noon. Then he has lunch at the hotel restaurant, public place, lots of witnesses. After that, he usually inspects one of his properties or meets with associates. You've been watching him. Since I got to town. Caleb turned back. During lunch, he hangs his coat on a stand by his table. His watch goes in the vest pocket. If someone bumped him at the right moment, they could lift the watch, get the key, replace the watch before he noticed. Rico nodded slowly. Risky, but possible. You'd need someone with quick hands and steady nerves. You know someone? I know a woman, Elena Cross, runs a dress shop on the main street, but she used to work the gambling halls in Denver before she got tired of that life. Best pickpocket I ever saw. Rico hesitated. She's trying to go straight, though. Might not want to get involved in something like this. Ask her. Explain what Vance has done, what he'll keep doing if someone doesn't stop him. Caleb's voice hardened. If she says no, we'll find another way. Rico studied him for a moment, then nodded. I'll talk to her tomorrow. In the meantime, you need to stay hidden. Vance has men looking for you. I passed 2 of them on the way up here, searching the South Ridge. They're not good trackers, but eventually they'll widen the search. Let them look. Caleb returned to the table and the whiskey. I'm not hiding forever. One way or another, this ends soon. Agreed. Rico stood, gathering the empty cups. I'll come back tomorrow night with news about Elena. You got enough supplies to last? I'll manage. Try not to shoot anyone while I'm gone. Rico paused at the door. And Caleb? What you did tonight, calling out Vance in front of the whole town, that took guts. Stupid guts, but guts all the same. Your pa would have been proud. He left before Caleb could respond, his footsteps fading into the night. Caleb sat alone by the dying fire. thinking about his father, about choices and consequences, about the strange allies that appeared when you needed them most. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new dangers. But tonight, for the first time since he'd buried his family, Caleb felt something other than cold rage. He felt the faint stirring of hope, the possibility that justice might be more than just a word people use to make themselves feel better about injustice. He banked the fire and stretched out on the hard floor, his pistol within reach, and let exhaustion pull him under. Morning came with the smell of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Caleb woke stiff and sore, his wounded arm throbbing dully. He ate dried meat and hard bread, drank cold water from the spring, and spent the day checking his weapons and watching the approaches to the cabin. Twice he saw riders in the distance, moving methodically across the valley floor. Vance's search parties. They never came close enough to worry about, but their presence was a reminder that the clock was ticking. Sooner or later, someone would get lucky or smart, and the sanctuary of the shepherd's cabin would become a trap. By the time Rico returned just after sunset, Caleb had made his decision. Win or lose, he was moving forward. Waiting was just another way of dying. Good news and bad news, Rico announced, unpacking fresh supplies. Good news is Elena agreed to help. Said Vance foreclosed on her brother's ranch 2 years ago, drove the family into poverty. Her brother ended up drinking himself to death in a flophouse in Cheyenne, so yeah, she's motivated. And the bad news? Vance changed his lunch routine. He's eating at the bank now, having food brought in. Probably figured out he's vulnerable in public. Rico grimaced. We need a new approach for getting that key. Caleb absorbed this, his mind already working through alternatives. The mansion. You said he lives half a mile outside town with security. What's the setup? Big house, 2 stories, stone and timber construction, 6 men on rotation, 2 patrolling the grounds, 2 at the main entrance, 2 resting. Vance's bedroom is on the 2nd floor, northeast corner. He keeps a guard posted outside his door at night. So we'd need to get past the perimeter, into the house, past the guard, and into his bedroom while he's sleeping, without being seen, heard, or causing any kind of alarm. Rico shook his head. It's borderline impossible. So was getting a confession from Wade Cutler. You had a Gatling gun for that. I still have it. Caleb met Rico's eyes. And I'm willing to use it again, if that's what it takes. But there might be a smarter way. He explained his idea. Rico listened, his expression shifting from skeptical to thoughtful to something like reluctant admiration. When Caleb finished, Rico was quiet for a long moment. It could work, he finally said, but the timing has to be perfect. One mistake and we're both dead. Then we don't make mistakes. Caleb stood and buckled on his gun belt. How long until we're ready? 2 days? Maybe 3? Elena needs time to set up her part, and I need to acquire some specific supplies. Rico started repacking his bag. You sure about this? Once we move, there's no going back. Vance will know, and he'll come at us with everything he's got. He's already coming. Caleb checked his pistol, the motion automatic and practiced. At least this way, we're choosing the ground. Rico nodded slowly. 2 days, then. I'll send word when everything's in place. He hesitated at the door. Elena wants to meet you first. Wants to look you in the eye, make sure you're serious about this and not just some hothead out for blind revenge. When? Tomorrow night. There's an old barn on the Kelso property, about a mile north of here. Abandoned, private. She'll be there at midnight. I'll be there. After Rico left, Caleb stood in the doorway watching the stars emerge as the storm clouds broke apart. Somewhere out there, Silas Vance was sitting in his mansion, confident in his power, certain that no one could touch him. That confidence was about to become his greatest weakness. Caleb touched the place where his father's letter sat folded in his breast pocket. The threat disguised as an offer, the corruption written in flowery language. Soon the whole territory would see what Silas Vance really was beneath the expensive suits and civic respectability. And when they did, there would be nowhere left for him to hide. Thunder rumbled again in the distance, and Caleb smiled without warmth. The storm was just beginning. The Kelso barn stood like a skeleton against the night sky, its roof half collapsed and walls leaning at angles that defied reason. Caleb approached on foot, leaving his horse tied a quarter-mile back in a stand of pines. The moon was a thin crescent, barely enough light to see by, which suited him fine. Less light meant fewer eyes could find him. He moved through the tall grass silently, every sense alert for signs of ambush or betrayal. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, not even with allies who claimed to share his cause. But when he slipped through the barn's sagging doorway, he found only one figure waiting in the shadows, a woman standing beside a shuttered lantern, her posture relaxed but ready. "You're early," she said. Her voice was lower than he expected, textured with smoke and years of hard living. "Rico said you were cautious, didn't mention paranoid. Cautious keeps you breathing." Caleb stayed near the door, his hand loose at his side. "You're Elena Cross, and you're the man who started a war with Silas Vance using a Civil War relic and pure spite." She opened the lantern's shutter slightly, letting a thin beam of light cut through the darkness. It illuminated her face, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, a mouth set in a line that suggested she'd smiled once but had forgotten how. She was maybe 30, dressed in practical riding clothes instead of the dresses her shop would suggest. "Rico tells me you need someone with delicate fingers and no conscience. I need someone who can lift a watch off Vance without him noticing. Rico says you're the best." "I was the best." Elena moved closer, studying him with the same intensity he was studying her. Past tense. "I left that life behind when I came to Covenant Ridge. Built something honest, something clean, and now you're asking me to throw it away. I'm asking you to help stop the man who destroyed your family." Her jaw tightened. "Rico told you about my brother. He told me Vance took your ranch, that your brother died because of it." "My brother died because he was weak." The words came out hard and bitter. "Because he'd rather drink himself into oblivion than fight back. But yeah, Vance took everything we had. Used legal tricks and fine print to foreclose on land our family held for 2 generations. We tried to fight it, tried to hire lawyers, but you can't win when the judge is on Vance's payroll and the banker holds your note." She crossed her arms. "So I came here, started over, kept my head down, and I survived. That's more than most people who cross Silas Vance can say. Survival isn't justice. No, but it beats dying for nothing." Elena's eyes flashed. "You think I haven't wanted to hurt Vance? That I haven't dreamed about watching him lose everything the way we did? But wanting and doing are different things. You go after a man like that, you better be ready to finish it, because if you don't, he'll hunt you to the ends of the earth and make your death last as long as possible." "I'm ready." Caleb stepped into the light, letting her see his face clearly. "I've already lost everything that mattered. My father, my brother, my sister, all dead because Vance wanted water rights. He thinks he can kill with impunity. That money and power make him untouchable. I'm going to prove him wrong." Elena studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she let out a slow breath. "Rico said you were committed. He didn't say you were already dead inside. Does it matter? Maybe not." She pulled a cigarette from her pocket and lit it with a match struck against her thumbnail. The flare illuminated her face briefly, showing something that might have been respect or pity, or both. "You understand what you're asking? If I lift that key and he discovers it missing before you get into that safe, he'll know someone's coming. He'll change everything, combinations, locks, probably burn half the evidence just to be safe. We get one chance." "I know. And if he catches me, he won't just kill me, he'll make an example. String me up in the town square. Let everyone see what happens to people who steal from Silas Vance." "That won't happen. You can't promise that." "No," Caleb admitted, "but I can promise that if it does, Vance won't live long enough to celebrate." Elena laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Fair enough." She took a long drag on the cigarette. "Here's what I need. Vance still goes to the hotel restaurant sometimes, but not on a schedule anymore. He's unpredictable, probably on purpose. So we need to create an opportunity, force him into a situation where I can get close." "What kind of situation?" "A public one. Somewhere he has to maintain appearances, play the respectable businessman." She tapped ash onto the dirt floor. "There's a charity auction next week. Benefits the new schoolhouse fund. Vance always attends, makes a big show of donating money and glad-handing with the town's elite. Lots of people, lots of movement, lots of distraction." Caleb shook his head. "That's too long. Vance's men are searching for me right now. Every day I wait gives them more chances to find me." "Then we move faster." Elena's eyes narrowed in thought. There's a property dispute hearing tomorrow afternoon at the courthouse. Vance will be there. He's got 3 cases on the docket, all foreclosures he's pushing through. Public proceeding, open gallery. If I show up as a concerned citizen, maybe bump into him on the courthouse steps. Can you do it in broad daylight with that many witnesses? Daylight's easier than night if you know what you're doing. People see what they expect to see: a woman stumbling, a man catching her, an apology, and a moment of flustered embarrassment. By the time anyone realizes what happened, I'm gone, and so is the key. She dropped the cigarette and crushed it under her boot. But I'll need insurance, someone watching my back in case things go wrong. Rico can do that. Rico's good at gathering information, not so good at violence. If Vance's men grab me, I need someone who can shoot straight and fast. She met his eyes. I need you. If I show up at the courthouse, Kincaid will arrest me on sight. Not if you're just another face in the crowd, hat pulled low, different coat, maybe a beard if you can grow one overnight. Elena's smile was sharp. You blend in, watch from a distance. If everything goes smooth, you never have to move. But if it doesn't, I'll be there. Good. She walked to the barn door, pausing to look back. One more thing. When this is over, when we've got the evidence and Vance is finished, I want out. Clean break, new life somewhere he can't follow. You help me disappear, or this deal's off. Caleb considered this. Where would you go? California, maybe? Or north to Montana territory? Somewhere I can start over again, this time without looking over my shoulder. Her voice softened slightly. I'm tired, Drayton. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being afraid. I do this job for you. I want a real chance at peace. You'll have it. My word. Elena nodded once, then slipped out into the darkness. Caleb waited 5 minutes before following, giving her time to disappear. When he finally stepped outside, the night was empty except for wind and stars and the distant cry of a coyote. He made his way back to his horse, his mind already working through the details of tomorrow's play. The courthouse, the crowd, the split-second timing required to lift a key from a man who trusted no one. It was dangerous, maybe even reckless. But it was movement, action, progress toward the moment when Silas Vance would finally answer for his crimes. Thunder rumbled somewhere to the west, promising more storms. Caleb swung into the saddle and turned the horse toward the shepherd's cabin, toward one more night of waiting before everything accelerated into chaos or victory. Or both. The courthouse was a brick building 3 stories tall, the grandest structure in Covenant Ridge except for Vance's bank. By 2 in the afternoon, the gallery was packed with people. Property owners facing foreclosure, speculators hoping to pick up cheap land, lawyers in cheap suits, and townspeople with nothing better to do than watch their neighbors lose everything. Caleb stood in the back corner wearing a borrowed coat 2 sizes too large and a hat that shadowed his face. He'd rubbed dirt into his jaw to simulate stubble and kept his eyes down, just another ranch hand curious about the proceedings. No one looked at him twice. Silas Vance sat at the plaintiff's table with 2 lawyers flanking him like bookends, all 3 dressed in suits that cost more than most people in the room earned in a month. Vance's expression was one of patient boredom, as if the whole proceeding was a formality he had to endure before getting back to more important matters. The judge, a heavy-set man named Harlan Briggs, who everyone knew played poker with Vance every Thursday, called the first case. A widow trying to keep her late husband's farm, pleading for more time to pay the debt. Her lawyer stammered through arguments that went nowhere. Vance's attorneys demolished her case with surgical precision, citing contracts and deadlines and legal precedents. 20 minutes later, the judge ruled in Vance's favor. The widow left crying. The second case went the same way. And the third, Caleb watched Vance's face throughout, seeing nothing but mild interest, as if watching other people's lives destroyed was no different than watching a horse race. Elena appeared just before the 4th case was called, slipping into the gallery and taking a seat 3 rows from the front. She wore a dark blue dress, respectable and forgettable, her hair pinned up beneath a modest hat. She didn't look at Caleb, didn't acknowledge anyone, just another concerned citizen attending public proceedings. The 4th case was called, another foreclosure, another family losing land they'd worked for generations. The arguments droned on. Caleb positioned himself near the door, watching both Elena and the exits. Outside, through the tall windows, he could see Rico lounging against a hitching post, apparently reading a newspaper but actually watching the courthouse steps. When the judge finally ruled, in Vance's favor, naturally, there was a 15-minute recess. People stood, stretched, filed out to smoke or use the facilities. Vance rose from his table, exchanging quiet words with his lawyers, then headed for the door. He'd have to pass directly by Elena to reach the steps. Caleb tensed, his hand drifting toward his concealed pistol. Elena timed it perfectly. She stood just as Vance reached her row, fumbled with her handbag, and stepped directly into his path. The collision was gentle but enough to require Vance to steady her with one hand. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Vance. I didn't see—" Her flustered apology was pitch perfect, exactly the right mix of embarrassment and deference. "Quite all right, miss." Vance's professional smile was automatic. "No harm done. I'm terribly clumsy today. She placed her hand on his arm for balance, then pulled back quickly. "Forgive me." "Think nothing of it." Vance was already moving past her, his attention shifting to one of his lawyers calling his name. The whole exchange took maybe 5 seconds. Elena smoothed her dress, picked up her handbag, and walked calmly toward the exit. She passed within 3 feet of Caleb without looking at him, her expression perfectly neutral. But in her left hand, concealed by the handbag, Caleb caught a glimpse of silver chain. She had it. He forced himself to wait another full minute, watching Vance on the courthouse steps talking with his lawyers and showing no sign of alarm or awareness. Then he slipped out through a side door and circled around to where Rico was still pretending to read his newspaper. "Well?" Rico asked quietly. She got it. "Where is she now?" "Headed to the dress shop. We're supposed to meet her there after dark." Caleb scanned the street looking for signs of pursuit or suspicion. Everything seemed normal, people going about their business, unaware that the balance of power in Covenant Ridge had just shifted in the space of 5 seconds. "You got everything else ready?" "Supplies are hidden in the alley behind the bank. Lockpicks, rope, dark lanterns, and I borrowed a wagon from the livery. Told them I needed it for a freight run tomorrow." Rico folded his newspaper. "We do this tonight?" "Tonight," Caleb confirmed. "Vance will notice the key missing eventually. Once he does, he'll move the records or destroy them. We can't give him that chance." "Agreed. What about after, assuming we get into the safe and find what we're looking for?" "We take everything, every document, every ledger, every scrap of evidence. Then we get it to someone who can't be bought, a federal marshal maybe, or a newspaper in Denver." Caleb's jaw tightened. "And then we make sure Vance knows exactly who took it from him." Rico raised an eyebrow. "That's the part where we die." "Maybe, but he'll die too, and his empire dies with him." Caleb started walking toward the edge of town, keeping to the shadows. "That's all that matters." "You're a hard man, Drayton. Vance made me this way." They separated at the corner of Main Street and Oak, Rico heading toward the boarding house where he kept a room, Caleb returning to the shepherd's cabin by a circuitous route that took him through rough country where tracks would be hard to follow. By the time he reached the cabin, the sun was setting and his wounded arm ached with a deep, persistent throb. He spent the remaining daylight hours checking his weapons and running through the plan in his mind, looking for weaknesses, for points where things could go catastrophically wrong. There were plenty. The bank's guards could be more alert than expected. The lock on Vance's office might be different than Rico described. The safe could have been moved or replaced. Any one of a dozen variables could turn the whole operation into a death trap. But doing nothing was also a kind of death, slower, quieter, but just as final. His family's murders would go unpunished. Vance would continue crushing anyone who stood against him. And Caleb would spend the rest of his life knowing he'd had a chance for justice and let it slip away because the odds were bad and the risks too high. No. Better to die trying than live knowing you didn't. As full darkness fell, Caleb loaded his pistol, checked his knife, and set out for Covenant Ridge one more time. Elena's dress shop occupied a narrow building between the apothecary and a lawyer's office. The front windows displayed fabrics and half-finished garments on wooden mannequins. But the back room, accessed through a door hidden behind a curtain, was where she did her real work. Caleb and Rico entered through the alley just after 9, finding Elena already changed into dark, practical clothes, her hair tied back, her face set with grim determination. "Any trouble?" Rico asked. Vance hasn't raised any alarm yet. Either he hasn't noticed the key missing or he's waiting to see who makes a move. Elena laid the watch and chain on her work table. But we're on borrowed time. He checks that watch a dozen times a day. By morning at the latest, he'll know. Caleb picked up the watch, examining the small brass key attached to the chain. It looked ordinary, unremarkable, just a key, but it represented access to secrets that could topple an empire. Did you copy it like we discussed? Wax impression's already made. I'll have a duplicate cut by tomorrow afternoon. She met his eyes. But if we're using the original tonight, we need to get it back on his person before he notices it's gone. How? Same way I took it. Public place, quick bump, slip it back into his pocket. Elena's expression was tight. Except this time he might be watching for it. If he's even slightly suspicious, if he checks that watch one more time before I can return it, then we move fast. Rico spread a map of the bank on the table, marking it with charcoal. 3 a.m, that's when the guards rotate. We go in through the service entrance here, up the back stairs to Vance's office. Elena, you keep watch in the alley. If anything goes wrong, if guards head our way, you signal with the dark lantern. 2 flashes. We abort and scatter. And if everything goes right, Elena asked, we're in and out in 30 minutes. Get the records, get clear, disappear until we can figure out the next move. Rico looked at Caleb. You still want to confront Vance directly after? Not yet. First we secure the evidence, get it somewhere safe. Then we hit him with it publicly, all at once, so he can't spin it or bury it. Caleb traced the route on the map with his finger. We expose him completely, let the whole territory see what he is. Only then do I finish this. Finish it how? Elena's voice was quiet. However it needs to be finished? She nodded slowly. All right. But after tonight, I want that clean break we discussed. New identity, enough money to get far away and stay hidden. You promised. And I'll keep that promise. Caleb folded the map. You've earned it. They spent the next hour going over details, timing, contingencies. When the church bells tolled 11, they separated. Elena to keep watch from her upstairs window, Rico to position the wagon and supplies, Caleb to wait in the darkness behind the tailor's shop, breathing the cold night air and listening to his heartbeat count down the minutes. At 2:45, Rico appeared like a ghost, carrying a canvas bag of tools. Guards just changed. Next rotation's not until 6. We've got our window. They moved to the service entrance, a heavy wooden door set into the brick wall of the bank. Rico worked the lock with practiced efficiency, his picks making soft clicking sounds barely audible over the wind. 30 seconds later, the door swung open on well-oiled hinges. Inside, the bank smelled of paper and ink and money. They moved through the darkness using a shuttered lantern that provided just enough light to navigate by, taking the back stairs 2 at a time. The second-floor hallway was lined with doors, offices for Vance's managers and accountants. His personal office was at the end, marked by a brass nameplate that caught the lantern light. Rico knelt by the lock, his ear close to the mechanism, his hands moving with delicate precision. Click. Turn, click. The door opened. Vance's office was larger than the others, furnished with expensive dark wood and leather. A massive desk dominated the center, flanked by filing cabinets and bookshelves. And against the far wall, exactly where Rico had described, sat the safe. A Mosler, black and imposing, with a combination dial on the front and a keyhole beneath it. 20 minutes, Rico whispered, kneeling in front of the safe. Keep the light steady. Caleb held the lantern while Rico went to work. The safecracker's hands moved with practiced certainty, spinning the dial slowly, stopping, listening, feeling for the subtle clicks and shifts that indicated the tumblers falling into place. Minutes crawled by. Outside, a dog barked. Footsteps sounded on the street below, probably a guard making rounds. Caleb's hand drifted to his pistol, ready to fight their way out if necessary. But the footsteps faded. The dog went quiet. And Rico kept working, his breathing slow and even, his focus absolute. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably 15 minutes, Rico slid the key into the lock and turned it. The safe door swung open with a soft creak. Inside were ledgers, dozens of them, leather-bound and meticulously organized. Rico pulled them out one at a time, flipping through pages, his eyes widening. This is it. This is everything. land deals, foreclosures, bribes paid to judges and marshals, names, dates, amounts. He looked up at Caleb. With this, we can bury him. Then we take all of it. They loaded the ledgers into the canvas bag, working quickly now, aware that time was running short. Rico also grabbed a stack of correspondence from a drawer inside the safe. Letters bearing official seals, contracts, deeds, everything that documented Silas Vance's criminal empire, all gathered in one place because the man was too paranoid to trust anyone else with the records of his corruption. That paranoia was about to destroy him. With the bag full and heavy, they closed the safe, locked Vance's office, and retraced their path to the service entrance. No alarms, no guards, no signs they'd been detected. They emerged into the alley just as the church bells struck 4 in the morning. Elena stepped out of the shadows, her face pale but relieved. Any trouble? None. Rico hefted the bag. We got everything. Then let's get out of here before our luck runs out. They separated again, each taking a different route away from the bank. Caleb carried the bag to where he'd hidden his horse, secured it in his saddlebags, and rode hard for the shepherd's cabin. Behind him, Covenant Ridge slept on, unaware that the foundations of its power structure had just been pulled out from beneath it. Dawn was breaking when Caleb finally reached the cabin. He unloaded the ledgers and spread them across the table, reading by the growing light. What he found made his stomach turn. Names he recognized, property owners who'd lost their land, families driven out, businesses crushed. All of it orchestrated by Vance through fraud, intimidation, and murder. Judges paid to rule in his favor, marshals paid to look the other way. Even the territorial governor's office had received contributions in exchange for favorable legislation. And there, in a ledger marked Special Expenditures, was an entry dated 4 days before his family's murder. Wade Cutler and Associates, Land Acquisition, Northern Territory, $2,000. The payment that had bought his father's death, his brother's, his sister's. All recorded in Vance's own handwriting, as clear as a confession. Caleb sat back, his hands trembling not with fear but with something closer to vindication. This was what he'd needed, what he'd risked everything to find. The irrefutable proof that Silas Vance was a murderer hiding behind the mask of respectability. Now came the hard part, getting this evidence to someone who could act on it. Someone beyond Vance's reach, beyond his money and influence. A federal marshal, maybe. Or multiple newspapers across the territory, releasing the information all at once so Vance couldn't suppress it. But first, he had to make sure Vance knew the game was over, that his secrets were no longer secret, that the reckoning had finally arrived. Caleb stood and walked to the cabin door, looking out at the valley below. Somewhere down there, Silas Vance was waking up in his mansion, preparing for another day of pretending to be a pillar of the community. By sunset, everyone would know the truth. And by midnight, one way or another, this would be finished. The discovery came at 8 in the morning when Silas Vance reached for his watch and found an empty pocket. He stood in his dressing room, one hand frozen in the gesture of checking the time, his face going from confusion to cold fury in the space of a heartbeat. His valet, a nervous man named Portis, watched from the doorway as Vance tore through his clothing from the previous day, then ransacked the entire room with methodical violence. "When did you last see it?" Portis ventured. "Yesterday, at the courthouse." Vance's voice was ice and razors. "Someone took it. Someone lifted my watch in broad daylight. Perhaps it simply fell. It didn't fall." Vance turned, his eyes flat and deadly. "Get my security chief, now, and send riders to the bank. I want every entrance guarded, every door locked. No one goes in or out until I arrive." By the time Vance reached the bank 20 minutes later, a crowd had already gathered outside, drawn by the unusual activity. 6 armed men stood at the entrance, turning away customers and employees alike. Vance pushed through without a word, taking the stairs 2 at a time, his expensive shoes hammering the wood like gunshots. His office door was locked, exactly as it should be. But when he opened the safe using the emergency combination he kept memorized, his worst fears materialized. The ledgers were gone, every single one. Years of carefully documented transactions, payments, names, and schemes, all vanished. He stood there for a full minute, staring into the empty safe, his mind racing through possibilities and implications. Someone had stolen his watch to get the key. Someone had cracked the combination. Someone had taken everything he'd built his empire on and turned it into a weapon pointed at his throat. And he knew exactly who. "Drayton," he said quietly. Then louder, to the security chief who'd appeared in the doorway. "Find Caleb Drayton. I want him alive. And I want everyone who helped him. Offer $1,000 for information, $5,000 for capture. Burn down every building between here and the territorial line if you have to. But find him." The security chief nodded and disappeared. Vance walked to the window and looked down at Covenant Ridge, at the town he'd molded and controlled for 15 years. It was all slipping away. He could feel it like sand through his fingers. But Silas Vance hadn't built an empire by accepting defeat. If Drayton wanted war, he'd get war. And when it was over, there wouldn't be enough of the boy left to bury. Rico arrived at the shepherd's cabin just after noon, his horse lathered and blowing hard. Vance knows. The whole town's crawling with his men, searching every building, questioning everyone. He's offering rewards, making threats, and he's put a $5,000 bounty on your head. Caleb looked up from the ledger he'd been reading. "Dead or alive?" "Alive, actually, which means he wants to make an example of you." Rico dismounted and tied his horse. "We need to move. This cabin won't stay hidden much longer." "Not yet. I'm still cataloging everything, making copies of the most damaging entries. We need to preserve this information in case something happens to the originals." "What's the point of preserving it if we're both dead?" "Then we make sure we're not." Caleb closed the ledger and stood. "How's Elena?" "Scared, but safe. She returned the watch to Vance's pocket yesterday evening, walked right up to him at the hotel, pretended to trip, slipped it back during the apology. He never noticed." Rico poured himself water from the pitcher. "But when he discovered the ledgers missing this morning, he had his men search her shop. They didn't find anything, but they're watching her now. She can't help us anymore without exposing herself." "She's done enough. Get her out of Covenant Ridge tonight. Use the money in my saddlebag. There's enough for her to reach California and start over. And us? We finish this." Caleb gathered the most incriminating ledgers and wrapped them in oilcloth. "There's a federal marshal's office in Silver Creek, about 60 miles northeast. If we ride hard, we can reach it by tomorrow night. Turn over the evidence, let the law handle it from there." Rico's expression was skeptical. "You really think a federal marshal's going to take on someone with Vance's connections? The man owns half the territorial government. He doesn't own all of it. And these ledgers prove crimes that fall under federal jurisdiction: mail fraud, witness tampering, corruption of federal appointees. Even if the local courts won't touch him, the federal government will." "Maybe." Rico didn't sound convinced. "And what about you? After you hand over the evidence? After the marshals start their investigation? What then? You just ride off into the sunset and hope Vance doesn't hunt you down?" "No." Caleb's voice went cold. "I'm going back to Covenant Ridge. I'm going to stand in the middle of Main Street and tell everyone what Silas Vance really is. I'm going to read from these ledgers, name every person he bribed, every family he destroyed, every crime he committed. And then I'm going to give him the same choice I gave Wade Cutler." "That's suicide." "That's justice." Caleb met Rico's eyes. "My family deserves to be avenged in public, where everyone can see. Not in some courtroom months from now where lawyers twist the truth and powerful men walk free. I want Vance to face what he's done in front of the people he's been lying to for years." Rico studied him for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "You're not planning to walk away from this, are you? You're planning to die taking him with you." "I'm planning to make sure he answers for his crimes. What happens after that?" Caleb shrugged. "I stopped caring about after the moment I buried my sister." "Well, I'm not dying with you." Rico's voice was matter-of-fact, without judgment. "I'll help you get the evidence to Silver Creek. I'll even ride back to Covenant Ridge with you. But when you make your stand, I'm getting clear. I've got no desire to be a martyr." "Fair enough." They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. Rico rode to town and arranged Elena's departure, then returned with supplies for the journey to Silver Creek. As the sun began its descent, painting the valley in shades of copper and gold, they loaded the horses and prepared to leave the shepherd's cabin for the last time. Caleb took one final look at the place where his father had taught him to hunt, to track, to read the land. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. A different Caleb who'd believed the world was fundamentally fair, that hard work and honest dealing would be rewarded, that good people were protected by laws and justice. that Caleb had died with his family. What remained was something harder, colder, shaped by grief and fury into a weapon with only one purpose left. They rode out as the stars began to emerge, heading northeast toward Silver Creek and whatever waited beyond. The journey took 2 days instead of one. Vance's search parties were everywhere, forcing Caleb and Rico to take longer routes through rough country where horses would be hard to track. They avoided roads, towns, anywhere people might recognize them and claim the bounty. At night they camped without fires, taking turns on watch, sleeping with weapons in hand. On the second evening, they spotted Silver Creek in the distance, a mining town bigger than Covenant Ridge, built around a river that had yielded silver and gold in quantity before playing out. The marshal's office was on the main street, a stone building with barred windows and a faded American flag hanging from a pole. U.S. Marshal William Hadley was a graying man in his 50s with hard eyes and a face weathered by decades of frontier law enforcement. He listened to Caleb's story without interrupting, his expression giving nothing away. When Caleb finished and laid the ledgers on his desk, Hadley opened them and began reading. 20 minutes passed in silence, then 30. Finally, Hadley closed the ledger he'd been examining and leaned back in his chair. "This is explosive," he said quietly. "If even half of what's documented here is accurate, Silas Vance is looking at 20 years in federal prison. Maybe more." "It's all accurate," Caleb said. "Those are his own records, kept in his own hand, and obtained by breaking into his bank and cracking his safe." Hadley's tone was neutral, but his meaning was clear. A defense attorney is going to argue the evidence was illegally obtained, that it's inadmissible. Federal jurisdiction doesn't require the same standards as territorial courts. You know that. I do. But I also know that prosecuting a man like Vance is going to require more than ledgers. It's going to require witnesses, testimony, corroboration. And most of the people who could testify are either on his payroll or too scared to speak up. Rico leaned forward. "What about Wade Cutler? He gave a signed confession implicating Vance in the Drayton murders. That's testimony. Obtained under duress from a known criminal." Hadley spread his hands. "Look, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying building a case that'll hold up in federal court is going to take time. Months, maybe years. And in the meantime, Vance is going to use every resource he has to discredit you, intimidate witnesses, and bury this evidence under legal motions." "So you're not going to do anything?" Caleb's voice was dangerously quiet. "I'm going to do my job." Hadley's eyes hardened. "Which means investigating these allegations properly, gathering additional evidence, building a case that can't be dismissed or corrupted. What I'm not going to do is rush into an arrest that'll get thrown out by the first judge who reviews it." He tapped the ledgers. "These are valuable, but alone, they're not enough. We need more. More time means more people getting hurt, more families losing their land. I understand your frustration." "No, you don't." Caleb stood abruptly. "You didn't watch your father get buried, didn't put your 9-year-old sister in the ground, didn't see the whole town look away because they were too scared to stand up to a man with money and power." His hands clenched into fists. "I'm not asking you to rush. I'm asking you to do what's right. And I will. But on my timeline, following proper procedure." Hadley stood as well, his voice firm. "You want justice, Mr. Drayton? Real justice? Then let me do this correctly. Otherwise, Vance walks and everything you've sacrificed means nothing." Caleb stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked out without another word. Rico grabbed the saddlebags and followed, leaving Marshal Hadley standing alone with the ledgers spread across his desk. Outside, the evening air was cool and sharp. Caleb stood in the street, breathing hard, fighting the urge to put his fist through something. Rico appeared beside him. "He's right, you know. If we want Vance to actually pay, we need to do this through proper channels. Proper channels failed my father. Proper channels let Vance operate for 15 years without consequences." Caleb's voice was bitter. "How many more families have to suffer while Hadley builds his perfect case? So what's your alternative? Ride back to Covenant Ridge and shoot Vance in the street? That's not justice, that's murder, and you'll hang for it." "Maybe, but at least he'll be dead." Rico grabbed Caleb's arm, forcing him to turn. "Listen to me. You've come this far, risked everything, gathered evidence that could actually destroy Vance's empire. Don't throw it away now because you're too angry to think straight. Give Hadley time to work. A week, maybe 2. See what he can build with what we've given him. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we disappear. Find a hole somewhere Vance's men can't follow. Wait it out. Rico's grip tightened. Your family's dead, Caleb. Nothing you do is going to bring them back. But you can make sure their deaths mean something. You can make sure Vance pays, properly and publicly. Isn't that worth more than dying in a gunfight that changes nothing? Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to reject the logic of patience and procedure, but beneath the rage and grief, a part of him knew Rico was right. Dying wouldn't bring justice. It would just be one more tragedy in a string of tragedies, one more victory for men like Silas Vance. 2 weeks, he finally said. I'll give Hadley 2 weeks. But if nothing happens, if Vance is still walking free and running Covenant Ridge like his personal kingdom, then I'm done waiting. Fair enough. Rico released his arm. Now let's find somewhere to sleep before Vance's bounty hunters catch up to us. They found a boarding house on the edge of town, paid cash for a room with 2 beds, and barricaded the door with a chair. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by every sound in the hallway, every creak of floorboards. Caleb dreamed of his sister's face and woke with his hand on his pistol, sweat cooling on his skin. Morning brought news that made the decision for them. The newspaper was 3 days old, delivered to Silver Creek by the weekly stage. Rico bought it from a vendor on the street corner and brought it back to the boarding house, his face grim. He handed it to Caleb without a word. The headline read, "Prominent businessman declares innocence in theft scandal." Below it, an interview with Silas Vance, full of righteous indignation and calculated lies. He claimed that a disgruntled employee, a man named Caleb Drayton, had stolen confidential business records after being dismissed for misconduct. That Drayton had fabricated evidence in a misguided attempt at revenge. That the entire story of murdered families and hired killers was the fantasy of an unstable mind seeking attention. And at the bottom of the article, Marshall Kincaid was quoted as saying the Territorial Governor's Office had launched an investigation into Caleb Drayton for theft, assault, and murder. A warrant had been issued for his arrest. Caleb read the article twice, his rage building with each word. Vance wasn't just defending himself. He was rewriting history, turning victim into criminal and murderer into victim. And people would believe it because people always believed men with power and money and respectable reputations. He's controlling the narrative, Rico said quietly. Getting his version out first, loudest, backed by official statements and legal proceedings. By the time Hadley builds his case, public opinion will already be set. Vance will be the wrong businessman. You'll be the violent criminal. And even if the evidence proves otherwise, people will remember the first story they heard. Then I need to get there first. Caleb folded the newspaper and stood. I need to tell my side before Vance buries it completely. How? He owns the newspaper in Covenant Ridge. You can't exactly buy advertisement space. I don't need the newspaper. Caleb checked his pistol, his movements automatic and practiced. I just need a crowd and a loud voice. You're going back. I was always going back? Caleb looked at Rico. You don't have to come. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I started helping you. Rico's smile was wry and resigned. Besides, I want to see the look on Vance's face when you tear his lies apart in front of everyone. That's worth the risk. They left Silver Creek within the hour, riding hard for Covenant Ridge. The journey back took a day and a half, pushing the horses to their limits. They arrived just after sunset on a Saturday evening, when the saloons would be full and the streets crowded with people seeking entertainment after a long week. Perfect timing for a public reckoning. Caleb left his horse with Rico at the edge of town and walked alone down Main Street, his coat unbuttoned, his hand resting on the grip of his pistol. People saw him coming and stopped, conversations dying mid-sentence. Someone ran toward the marshal's office. Someone else ducked into the Rusty Nail Saloon, probably to spread word that the wanted man had returned. Good. Let them gather. Let them watch. Caleb climbed the steps of the town hall and turned to face the growing crowd. Within minutes, 100 people had congregated, drawn by curiosity and the promise of violence. He saw Meeker in the crowd, and the nervous clerk from the telegraph office, and a dozen other faces he recognized. And pushing through from the direction of the bank, flanked by 4 armed men, came Silas Vance himself. Their eyes met across the distance. Vance's expression was cold satisfaction, the look of a man who thought he'd already won. Caleb pulled one of the copied ledger pages from his coat and held it high where everyone could see. "My name is Caleb Drayton," he called out, his voice carrying across the crowd. 10 days ago, Silas Vance hired Wade Cutler and 5 other men to murder my father, my brother, and my 9-year-old sister. He did it because my father refused to sell water rights that Vance wanted, and I can prove it. Vance started forward, his voice sharp. "This man is wanted for—" "I have his own ledgers," Caleb continued, speaking over him. "Records kept in his own handwriting, documenting every bribe, every payoff, every illegal transaction he's made for 15 years. I have proof that he paid Wade Cutler $2,000 for what he called land acquisition, 4 days before my family was killed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People looked at Vance, then back at Caleb, uncertainty replacing the certainty they'd felt reading the newspaper's version of events. "Those records were stolen," Vance said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Obtained illegally through breaking and entering. They prove nothing except that Caleb Drayton is a criminal and a liar." "Then explain this." Caleb read from the ledger page, his voice clear and deliberate. "March 15th, payment to Judge Harlan Briggs, $500. March 22nd, payment to Marshal Ben Kincaid, $300. April 7th, payment to Territorial Governor's Clerk Samuel Hayes, $2,000. Should I continue?" He looked directly at Vance. "Or would you like to keep claiming you're an honest businessman?" The crowd's murmurs grew louder, angry. People who'd lost property in Vance's foreclosures, who'd watched neighbors destroyed, who'd suspected corruption but never had proof, they were all listening now, seeing the pattern, understanding what had been done to them. Vance's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. "Marshal Kincaid, arrest this man. He's wanted for murder and theft." Kincaid pushed through the crowd, his hand on his gun, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Caleb, I don't want to do this, but you're making it—" "Tell them," Caleb interrupted, looking at Kincaid. "Tell them about the $300 Vance paid you last month. Tell them why you didn't investigate my family's murder. Tell them why Wade Cutler and his men were allowed to operate freely in this territory." Kincaid stopped, his face flushing red. "That's not— I never— It's right here in his records. Date, amount, notation, monthly retainer, Marshall B. Kincaid. You've been on his payroll for 3 years. The crowd turned on Kincaid now, voices rising in anger and betrayal. The marshal backed away, one hand raised defensively, his authority crumbling like sand. "I was just supplementing my salary. It didn't mean— It meant you looked the other way while good people died." Caleb's voice was cold as winter steel. "It meant you protected a murderer because he paid you." Vance stepped forward, trying to regain control. "None of this is admissible evidence. It's stolen property, coerced testimony, hearsay. No court will—" "I'm not interested in courts." Caleb descended the steps slowly, his eyes locked on Vance. "I'm interested in truth. And the truth is that you're a murderer, a thief, and a liar. You've built your empire on blood and corruption. And tonight, in front of everyone you've been fooling for years, I'm tearing it down." He stopped 10 feet from Vance, his hand still resting on his pistol. The armed men flanking Vance tensed, but Vance raised a hand to stop them. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "You've lost," Caleb said quietly, just loud enough for Vance and the nearest onlookers to hear. "Even if you kill me right here, the evidence is already with a federal marshal. Your ledgers, your records, all of it. Within a month, federal investigators will be crawling through every transaction you've ever made. Your bribes won't protect you. Your lawyers won't save you. You're finished." Vance's composure finally cracked. "You self-righteous fool. You think exposing me changes anything? You think these people will suddenly grow spines and stand up to power? They're sheep. They'll go back to their lives, forget all about this, and in 6 months, everything will be exactly as it was." "Maybe." Caleb's hand moved to his pistol. "But you won't be here to see it." Vance's eyes widened. "You're going to murder me? In front of witnesses?" "I'm going to give you the choice my father never got." Caleb's voice was ice. "Draw your weapon and face me like a man. Or stand there and admit in front of everyone that you're a coward who only kills when he can hire others to do it." The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Vance's hand moved slowly toward his coat. You really think... He drew fast, faster than Caleb expected. The Derringer cleared his pocket in a blur of motion, barrel rising. But Caleb was already moving, his hand closing on his Colt. Years of practice turning thought into action without conscious intent. 2 shots rang out, so close together they almost sounded like one. Vance staggered backward, the Derringer falling from his hand. Blood bloomed across his white shirt, spreading like spilled ink. He looked down at the wound, then up at Caleb, his expression one of absolute shock. You... He tried to say more, but blood filled his mouth. He collapsed to his knees, then fell forward into the dust. Caleb stood over him, smoke curling from his pistol barrel. The crowd erupted in chaos, screaming, shouting, people running in every direction. Vance's hired men reached for their weapons, but Rico appeared behind them with a rifle, his voice cutting through the noise. Don't. He won the fight fair. You want to die over his corpse? That's your choice. But think hard before you make it. The hired men hesitated, looked at each other, then slowly backed away. They'd been paid to protect Vance, not to die avenging him. Marshal Kincaid stood frozen, his face ashen. Caleb, you just... in front of everyone. I have to arrest you. Then do it. Caleb holstered his pistol. But know that when the federal marshals arrive, when they start investigating, your name's going to be on the list too. You took Vance's money. You enabled his crimes. You're just as guilty as he was. Kincaid's hand trembled on his gun, but he didn't draw. The fight had gone out of him. From somewhere in the crowd, a voice called out, "Good riddance!" And then another. About time someone stood up to him. The sentiment spread, people who'd been silent for years finally finding their voices, freed by the death of the man who'd held them captive through fear and corruption. Caleb turned and walked away from Vance's body, through the parting crowd, toward where Rico waited with the horses. No one tried to stop him. Even Kincaid just stood there watching him go, knowing that any authority he'd once held had died alongside Silas Vance. As they rode out of Covenant Ridge, Caleb looked back one final time at the town where his family had died, where he'd been forged into something hard and merciless by grief and necessity. The crowd was still gathered around Vance's body, their voices rising in argument and revelation as the full scope of his corruption became clear. Justice had been served, not clean, not legal, but undeniably real. And somewhere in the darkness overhead, Caleb imagined his father and brother and sister looking down, finally at peace knowing their deaths had been answered. They rode through the night without stopping, putting distance between themselves and Covenant Ridge until the lights of the town disappeared behind the hills. Only when the first gray light of dawn began to soften the eastern horizon did Rico finally speak. "You know there's no going back from this." Caleb said nothing, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. His hands were steady on the reins, but inside he felt hollow, scraped clean of everything except a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with the hours in the saddle. "Kincaid might not have the spine to come after you, but word's going to spread," Rico continued. "Federal marshals will hear about it. They'll have questions about why you didn't wait for the law to handle Vance, about why you shot him in the street like a common outlaw. It was a fair fight. Everyone saw him draw first. Fair doesn't matter when powerful people are dead. The territorial governor's office, the mining companies, the railroad interests, they all benefited from Vance's corruption. You think they're going to let his death go unanswered just because he drew first?" Rico shook his head. "They'll come after you, Caleb. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but they'll come, and they'll use the law to do it, make it all look proper and justified. Let them come." Caleb's voice was flat, empty. "I did what I set out to do. Vance is dead. My family's been avenged. Whatever happens now doesn't change that." Rico studied him in the growing light, seeing something that made him frown. "You planning to just wait around for them to catch up to you? Because that's not survival, that's suicide with extra steps. I'm planning to see this through properly, get those ledgers to people who can use them, make sure Vance's whole operation gets exposed. After that," Caleb shrugged. "After that, I don't much care what happens." "Well, I care," Rico's voice hardened, "because I didn't risk my neck helping you just to watch you throw your life away out of some misguided sense that you don't deserve to live. Your family's dead, yeah, that's a tragedy, but you're still breathing, which means you still got choices to make. And dying like a martyr doesn't honor their memory. It just wastes the chance they never got. Caleb pulled his horse to a stop, turning to face Rico fully. What do you want me to say? That I'm going to ride off into the sunset and build a new life somewhere? Pretend none of this happened? My father's dead because he tried to do the right thing through proper channels. My brother and sister are dead because evil men don't care about innocence or fairness. I've got blood on my hands and a price on my head, and you're telling me I should care about surviving? I'm telling you that survival's not the same as giving up. You can disappear, start fresh somewhere Vance's associates won't find you. California, Montana, maybe even Mexico. Take a new name. Build something different. That's not forgetting. That's choosing to live instead of die. And what about justice for everyone else Vance destroyed? The families foreclosed on, the businesses crushed, all the people who suffered while he got rich? The ledgers will handle that, Rico said firmly. Marshall Hadley's got everything he needs to tear apart Vance's empire. The banks will get audited, the judges investigated, the whole corrupt system dismantled piece by piece. That's real justice. Slow, methodical, boring as hell, but effective. Your part's done. You exposed him. You stopped him. You made sure he'll never hurt anyone again. That's enough. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, Rico's words settling into the hollow places inside him. Maybe there was truth in what the man said. Maybe choosing to survive wasn't the same as running away. Maybe there was a difference between honoring the dead and joining them. Where would I even go? He finally asked. That's up to you. But I know a man in San Francisco who owes me a favor. He can get you papers, a new identity, maybe even a job on one of the shipping lines if you're interested in seeing the world. Or if you prefer land, there's territory opening up in Montana, homesteads for anyone willing to work them, no questions asked about where you came from. And you? Rico's smile was wry. I'm heading back to Covenant Ridge, believe it or not. With Vance gone, there's going to be a power vacuum. Smart man could position himself as a legitimate businessman, help rebuild the town properly this time. Make some money, make some amends. Who knows? Maybe even run for mayor eventually. You'd be good at it. Damn right I would. Rico's expression softened slightly. But first we need to finish what we started. Get those ledgers to the right people. Make sure the evidence sticks. And we need to make sure Elena's safely away before any of Vance's remaining associates start asking questions about who helped you. They rode on as the sun climbed higher, following a route that would take them back to Silver Creek and Marshall Hadley. The landscape rolled past, sage and rock, an endless sky, indifferent to human struggles and tragedies. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled on thermal currents, hunting. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat cold rations. Caleb found himself thinking about his father, not about his death, but about his life. The way Thomas Drayton had built the ranch from nothing, had raised 3 children alone after their mother died, had tried to teach them that integrity mattered more than profit, and that standing for what was right sometimes meant standing alone. His father had died for those principles, but he'd also lived by them, had been respected and loved because of them. That legacy didn't die with him. It lived on in Caleb's choices, in the decision to seek justice instead of just revenge, to expose corruption instead of just inflicting pain. Maybe that was the real way to honor the dead, not by joining them, but by carrying forward what they'd stood for. I'll go to Montana, Caleb said suddenly. After we're done with Hadley, I'll take whatever new identity your friend can arrange, find a piece of land somewhere remote, build something clean. Rico nodded slowly, satisfaction crossing his face. Good. That's good, Caleb. Your father would approve. You think so? I know so. Thomas Drayton was a builder, not a destroyer. He'd want you to build something too, even if it has to be under a different name in a different place. Rico stood and brushed dirt from his pants. Now let's get moving. The sooner we hand over this evidence, the sooner you can disappear properly. They reached Silver Creek just after sunset, riding straight to the marshal's office where William Hadley was working late by lamplight. He looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from surprise to grim understanding when he saw their faces. I heard what happened in Covenant Ridge, he said without preamble. Silas Vance shot dead in the street. You've complicated things considerably, Mr. Drayton. He drew on me first. It was self-defense. That's not how it's going to play in the territorial papers, or in the governor's office, or anywhere else that matters. Hadley set down his pen. You've given them exactly what they need to paint you as a violent criminal and dismiss everything in those ledgers as fabrications by a madman. Then make sure they can't dismiss it, Caleb said. You've got the evidence. Use it. Prove that every word in those ledgers is true, that Vance was exactly what I said he was. Do that, and it won't matter what the newspapers say about me. Hadley was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. I've been working on exactly that, cross-referencing the ledger entries with bank records, court filings, property transfers. And you're right, it's all there. Every bribe, every fraudulent transaction, every piece of corruption documented in excruciating detail. He pulled out a folder thick with papers. I've also been corresponding with federal prosecutors in Denver. They're very interested in several entries involving mail fraud and witness tampering in federal cases. How long until you can move on it? I've already moved. Warrants were issued this morning for Judge Briggs, Marshal Kincaid, and 4 others named in the ledgers. Federal agents are en route to Covenant Ridge as we speak to execute them. Hadley's expression was hard with satisfaction. By this time tomorrow, half of Vance's corrupt network will be in federal custody awaiting trial. But Rico let out a low whistle. You work fast when you want to. I work thoroughly, Hadley corrected. And once I started digging, once I had those ledgers to guide me, the whole rotten structure became visible. Vance wasn't just one corrupt businessman. He was the linchpin of a system that infected 3 territories. Taking him down properly means taking down everyone who enabled him. What about the people he destroyed? Caleb asked. The families who lost their land, their businesses? Is there any justice for them? Civil suits can be filed once the criminal cases conclude. With Vance dead and his co-conspirators facing prison, many of those fraudulent foreclosures can be challenged and potentially reversed. The bank's assets will be seized, liquidated, used to make restitution. Hadley met Caleb's eyes. It won't bring back what was lost. It won't undo the suffering, but it's something, more than most victims of corruption ever get. Caleb nodded, feeling the tight knot in his chest loosen slightly. This was what he'd wanted, not just Vance's death, but the complete exposure of everything he'd built on blood and lies, the systematic dismantling of corruption that had poisoned the territory for years. What about me? He asked quietly. What happens now? Hadley leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Officially, you're wanted for questioning in the death of Silas Vance. But given that he drew on you first, given that dozens of witnesses saw it happen, and given that you've cooperated fully in exposing his criminal enterprise, he paused. I'm inclined to view it as justifiable self-defense. I'll include that assessment in my report to the territorial authorities. Will that be enough? Honestly? I don't know. You've made powerful people very nervous. Some will want you prosecuted as an example, to show that taking the law into your own hands has consequences. Others will quietly thank you for removing a problem they couldn't handle through official channels. Hadley spread his hands. My advice? Disappear for a while. Let the dust settle. Let the trials proceed. Let public opinion shift as the full scope of Vance's crimes becomes clear. In 6 months, maybe a year, the political climate might be different enough that you could return without fear of arrest. I'm not planning to return, Caleb said. Covenant Ridge has nothing for me anymore. Then you're making the smart choice. Hadley stood and extended his hand. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Not the legal thing, maybe, but the right thing. Sometimes those aren't the same. Caleb shook his hand, feeling the weight of the marshal's words. Not the legal thing, but the right thing. That distinction had defined his entire journey from the moment he'd stood over his family's graves and made his vow. They left Hadley's office as full darkness settled over Silver Creek. Rico led the way to a modest hotel on the edge of town where they could get rooms without too many questions. As they climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, Caleb found himself thinking about what came next. The long ride to San Francisco, the new identity, the fresh start in Montana territory. It all seemed impossibly far away, like someone else's life waiting to be stepped into. But maybe that was exactly what he needed, to step out of the Caleb Drayton who'd been forged by grief and fury, and into someone new who could build instead of destroy. They stayed in Silver Creek for 3 days while Rico made arrangements, and Caleb waited for word from Marshal Hadley. The news, when it came, was better than expected. The arrests in Covenant Ridge had triggered a cascade of confessions and plea bargains as Vance's former associates scrambled to save themselves. Judge Briggs had already given testimony implicating 2 territorial senators and a federal land agent. Marshal Kincaid had provided details on at least a dozen unsolved murders that Vance had ordered over the years. The full scope of the corruption was staggering, but with each new revelation, Caleb felt a small measure of peace settle into place. His family's deaths hadn't been meaningless. Their murder had been the catalyst that brought down an empire of evil. On the 4th morning, Elena Cross arrived on the westbound stage, dressed in traveling clothes and carrying 2 small bags containing everything she'd managed to salvage from her old life. Rico had arranged her passage, had even given her enough money to establish herself in Sacramento, where she had distant relatives. She found Caleb and Rico at the hotel restaurant, eating breakfast and reading the latest newspaper accounts of the trials. When she sat down, her face was drawn, but her eyes held something like relief. "I heard what happened," she said quietly. "Everyone in Covenant Ridge is talking about it. Some say you're a hero. Others say you're a murderer who'll burn in hell." "And what do you say?" Caleb asked. Elena was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. "I say thank you. For my brother, for my family, for everyone who suffered while good people did nothing. You did something. That matters. You helped make it possible. We all did what we had to do." She pulled her hand back and picked up a cup of coffee the waitress had brought. "Now I'm going to do what I have to do next. Disappear, start over, try to build something honest and clean, same as you. California treating you well so far?" "Haven't gotten there yet, but I'm hopeful." She smiled slightly, the expression transforming her face. "For the first time in years, I'm actually hopeful about the future. That's not nothing." They talked for another hour, sharing stories and making plans that would never intersect again. When the stage driver called for westbound passengers, Elena stood and gathered her bags. She paused at the door, looking back at Caleb. "Your family would be proud of you. You know that, right?" Caleb felt his throat tighten, but managed to nod. "Good. Don't forget it when things get hard." She touched the brim of her hat in a gesture that was half salute, half goodbye, then walked out into the bright morning sun and climbed aboard the stage. Rico and Caleb stood on the hotel porch and watched the stage roll away until it was just a distant speck on the road west. Then Rico clapped Caleb on the shoulder. "My contact in San Francisco sent a telegram. He can have your papers ready in a week. New name, new history, clean enough to pass any background check. After that, you're free to go wherever you want. Be whoever you want." He paused. "You thought about what name you'll take?" Caleb had been thinking about exactly that for days. He couldn't be Caleb Drayton anymore. That name would follow him, would draw attention and questions. But he didn't want to lose himself completely, didn't want to erase the man his father had raised him to be. "Thomas," he finally said. "My first name will be Thomas, after my father." "Good choice. And the last name?" "Cross, after Elena, after someone else who survived and chose to start over. Thomas Cross." Rico tested the name, nodded approval. "Solid, respectable. Won't raise eyebrows anywhere you go." He pulled out a worn notebook and scribbled something. "I'll send the details to my contact. 1 week from today, you can pick up your papers at the Wells Fargo office in San Francisco. After that, you're on your own." "What about you? When are you heading back to Covenant Ridge?" "Tomorrow morning. Town needs someone to help rebuild, and I figure I owe it to your father's memory to make sure it's done right this time." Rico's smile was genuine. "Who knows? Maybe in 10 years, Covenant Ridge will be known for something other than corruption and murder. That'd be something worth building." They shook hands, and Caleb felt the weight of gratitude for this man who'd helped him when he had every reason not to, who'd risked his life for principles that weren't even his own. "Thank you," Caleb said simply, "for everything. Don't mention it. Literally, don't mention it. As far as anyone knows, we never met, and I had nothing to do with any of this." Rico's grin widened. "But between you and me, it was my pleasure watching you take down Silas Vance. That's a memory I'll carry to my grave." The week passed slowly. Caleb spent his days walking the streets of Silver Creek, watching people go about their ordinary lives, trying to imagine what his own ordinary life might look like once he became Thomas Cross. He practiced the name in his head, Practiced the story Rico had helped him construct. A ranch hand from Wyoming Territory looking for new opportunities, no family to speak of, no particular ties to anywhere. It felt like wearing someone else's clothes. But he supposed that was the point. On the 7th day, he boarded a stage heading west, carrying everything he owned in a single bag. The journey to San Francisco took 4 days through spectacular country that Caleb barely noticed, his mind occupied with memories and what-ifs, and the constant awareness that every mile took him further from the life he'd known. San Francisco hit him like a physical force. The noise, the crowds, the smell of salt water and fish, and humanity packed too close together. After months in frontier towns and open country, the city felt overwhelming. But it also felt anonymous, a place where one more face would never be noticed or remembered. The Wells Fargo office was exactly where Rico had said it would be, a substantial brick building near the waterfront. Caleb gave the clerk the code phrase Rico had provided, and 10 minutes later he was holding a leather folder containing a birth certificate, letters of reference, and a deed to a small property in Montana Territory, all made out to Thomas Cross. The man he'd been was officially dead. The man he was becoming held his entire future in a folder that weighed almost nothing. He spent 3 days in San Francisco, using some of his remaining money to buy proper traveling gear and supplies for the journey north. On the 4th day, he boarded a ship heading up the coast toward Portland, where he'd catch a wagon train into Montana Territory. Standing at the rail as the ship pulled away from the dock, Caleb, Thomas, watched San Francisco recede into the distance, the city of his rebirth, the place where Caleb Drayton had ceased to exist and Thomas Cross had been born. The voyage took 5 days of rough seas and spectacular coastal scenery. Thomas spent most of it on deck, watching the water and thinking about his father's stories of the war, of being forged in fire and coming out changed but not broken. He understood those stories now in ways he never had before. Portland was smaller than San Francisco, but still substantial, a timber town that smelled of sawdust and ambition. Thomas stayed just long enough to join a wagon train heading east into Montana Territory, paying his fee and keeping to himself among the families and fortune seekers making the same journey. The wagon master, a grizzled man named Hawkins, asked only a few questions. "You got people waiting for you in Montana?" "No, just looking for land to work." "You know anything about ranching?" "Grew up on a ranch. No cattle, horses, how to work the land." "Good enough." Hawkins marked something in his ledger. "We leave at dawn. You cause trouble. You get left behind. Understood?" "Understood." The journey took 6 weeks through some of the most beautiful country Thomas had ever seen. Mountains that scraped the sky, rivers so clear you could see every stone on the bottom, valleys thick with grass and wildflowers. The other travelers were friendly enough, though Thomas kept his distance, not wanting to form attachments or answer too many questions. But there was one family he couldn't quite avoid. A widow named Margaret Walsh traveling with her 2 children, a boy of 10 and a girl of 7. They'd lost their husband and father to pneumonia the previous winter, and were heading to Montana to start over on land Margaret's brother had claimed. The children reminded Thomas painfully of Samuel and Lucy. He found himself helping them when their wagon got stuck, teaching the boy how to tie proper knots, showing the girl how to identify which plants were safe to eat. Margaret noticed and thanked him quietly one evening as they sat around the communal fire. "You're good with children. You have family?" "Had," Thomas said carefully. "Lost them a while back." "I'm sorry." Her voice held genuine sympathy. "It's a hard thing, losing people you love." "Yes, it is. But you keep going anyway. Build something new, even when it feels impossible." She looked at her children, who were playing some game with other kids from the train. "That's all we can do, really. Keep going." Thomas nodded, finding unexpected comfort in her words. Keep going. Build something new. That's what his father would have wanted, what Lucy and Samuel would have wanted if they could speak. When the wagon train finally reached its destination, a settlement called Clearwater nestled in a valley between 2 mountain ranges, Thomas felt something shift inside him. This place, with its clean rivers and endless sky and people trying to build honest lives from nothing, felt right in a way nothing had since he'd buried his family. He filed his claim on 160 acres north of town, land that had good water and timber and grass enough for cattle. Then he bought tools and lumber and set about building a cabin, working from dawn to dusk until his hands bled and his back screamed and exhaustion pulled him under each night. It was good work, clean work, the kind of work that built instead of destroyed. Margaret and her children settled on the adjacent property, and Thomas found himself helping them too, raising their cabin, fixing their wagon, teaching young James how to handle an axe properly. Margaret tried to pay him, but he refused. "Neighbors help neighbors," he said. "That's how it works." "Then let me at least feed you properly. You're getting too thin living on hardtack and jerky." He accepted that offer and soon found himself eating dinner with the Walsh family several nights a week. The children filled the silence with their chatter, and Margaret's cooking reminded him of home in ways that were painful but also healing. Slowly, carefully, Thomas Cross built a life. He acquired cattle, expanded his herd, developed a reputation as a fair dealer and a good neighbor. People in Clearwater knew him as quiet but reliable, someone who kept his word and helped others without expecting anything in return. No one asked about his past. Out here, everyone had a story they'd rather not tell, a reason they'd come so far to start over. That mutual understanding created a kind of unspoken covenant. We won't ask about yesterday if you don't ask about ours. Mazame. 2 years passed, then 3. The letters from Rico arrived irregularly, brought by whatever trader or traveler happened to be heading north from the territories. They told of Covenant Ridge's transformation, of new leadership and honest governance, of families returning to reclaim land that had been stolen from them. The trials had concluded with most of Vance's associates receiving prison sentences. The town was healing, slowly but surely. Thomas was glad to hear it, but it felt like news from another world, someone else's story. His own story was here, in this valley, with these people. He'd become part of the community, served on the town council, helped organize barn raisings and harvest festivals, mediated disputes and offered advice when asked. The man he'd been, forged by grief and fury, had been gradually replaced by someone softer, more patient, more willing to believe in second chances and new beginnings. Margaret noticed the change. They'd grown closer over the years, their friendship deepening into something neither of them had quite expected. One evening, as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, she finally gave voice to what had been building between them. "I know you're not telling me everything about your past, and that's all right. Everyone's entitled to their secrets." She looked at him, her expression open and honest. "But I want you to know that whatever happened before, whoever you were, the man you are now is someone I trust, someone I care about." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, watching the light fade. "I did things I'm not proud of. Hurt people, even if they deserved it. Became someone my father might not have recognized. But you're not that person anymore." "No, I'm trying not to be. That's all any of us can do. Try to be better tomorrow than we were yesterday." She reached over and took his hand. "You've been good to me and my children. You've helped build this community, made it stronger and safer. That's who you are, Thomas Cross. Whatever came before doesn't change that." He turned to face her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes, the acceptance. And for the first time since he'd buried his family, he felt something other than emptiness when he thought about the future. "I'd like to tell you sometime. About before, about who I was and what I did. When you're ready, I'll listen." She squeezed his hand gently. "But only when you're ready." That night, lying in his cabin listening to the wind in the pines, Thomas thought about his father and brother and sister. About the boy he'd been who'd believed in justice and fairness and the fundamental decency of people. About the man he'd become who'd learned that sometimes justice required hard choices and violent action. And about the man he was still becoming, someone who could carry the weight of his past without being crushed by it, who could honor the dead while building something for the living. He fell asleep thinking of Margaret's hand in his, of her children's laughter, of the life he was slowly, carefully constructing from the ruins of what had been destroyed. 5 years after leaving Covenant Ridge, Thomas Cross married Margaret Walsh in a simple ceremony attended by the entire settlement of Clearwater. James and Sarah stood with them, along with Rico Salazar, who'd made the long journey from Covenant Ridge, as Thomas's best man. Over whiskey after the ceremony, Rico told Thomas about the final chapter of the Vance story. The bank had been liquidated, the assets distributed to victims. A monument had been erected in the Covenant Ridge Cemetery, listing the names of everyone who died because of Vance's greed, including Thomas Drayton, Lucy Drayton, and Samuel Drayton. "The town remembers them," Rico said quietly. "Remembers what they stood for, what their deaths exposed. Every year on the anniversary, people gather at that monument and tell the story. Make sure the next generation knows what corruption costs, why integrity matters." He looked at Thomas. "Your father's sacrifice wasn't wasted. Neither was yours." Thomas absorbed this, feeling the old grief stir but no longer overwhelm. "Thank you for telling me. You deserve to know. They've become heroes in the retelling, martyrs who died standing against tyranny. And you," Rico smiled slightly, "you're the ghost who brought down an empire and then disappeared. Some say you died in the shootout with Vance. Others say you rode off into legend. A few claim to have seen you in different territories, always helping people, always moving on. Let them think what they want. Thomas Drayton's dead. Let him rest." "Fair enough." Rico raised his glass. "To Thomas Cross, then. May he live a long, boring, peaceful life." They drank to that, and to old friendships and new beginnings. Rico stayed a week, helping with the ranch work and charming everyone in Clearwater with stories that were only half true. When he finally left, heading back to Covenant Ridge where he'd recently been elected mayor, he pulled Thomas aside one last time. "You did good, Caleb, Thomas. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something meaningful. Not many people can do that. I had help. We all need help. That's not weakness. That's being human." Rico clapped him on the shoulder. "Take care of that family of yours. And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." Thomas watched him ride away, this unlikely ally who'd helped save his life and his soul. Then he turned back toward his cabin where Margaret and the children waited, where dinner would be ready and the evening chores needed doing, and 1,000 small ordinary tasks demanded attention. This was his life now. Not dramatic or legendary, but real and solid and built on foundations that wouldn't crumble. He raised cattle and children, helped neighbors and settled disputes, lived quietly and honestly in a way that would have made his father proud. The nightmares still came sometimes. Visions of fire and blood, of his sister's grave, of Vance falling in the street. But they came less often as the years passed, replaced by dreams of Margaret's smile and James learning to ride, and Sarah reading by lamplight, and all the small moments that constituted a life worth living. He never forgot who he'd been or what he'd done. The man who'd stood over 3 graves and sworn vengeance, who'd hunted killers and exposed corruption, who'd shot Silas Vance in front of 100 witnesses. That man was still part of him, would always be part of him. But he was no longer defined by that man. He'd become something more, something better. A husband and father, a rancher and neighbor, a member of a community that valued him for who he was now rather than who he'd been. Sometimes late at night, when everyone else was asleep, Thomas would sit on his porch and look up at the stars. He'd think about his father teaching him to rope cattle, about Lucy singing while she did her chores, about Samuel's plans for the future, and he'd whisper into the darkness, telling them about his life, about Margaret and the children, about the peace he'd found in this remote valley far from the places where they'd lived and died. He liked to think they could hear him, that wherever they were, they knew he'd kept his promise. He'd made Vance pay, had torn down the empire built on their blood. But more than that, he'd survived. He'd found a way to live with the grief and guilt and fury without letting it destroy him. He'd built something good from the ashes of something terrible. And in the end, that was the truest justice of all. Not just punishing the guilty, but creating a life that honored the innocent. Not just tearing down corruption, but building something honest in its place. Not just surviving, but living, truly living, in a way that proved evil didn't get the final word. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of wood smoke and earth and possibility. Somewhere in the cabin, Sarah laughed at something James said. Margaret called out asking if Thomas wanted coffee. He stood and walked inside, closing the door on the darkness and the past, stepping into the warm light of home and family and future. Caleb Drayton had died in Covenant Ridge the same night as Silas Vance, his story complete, his vengeance achieved. But Thomas Cross lived on, and his story was just beginning.